Brand is something that most early stage companies don't invest in. It's seen often as important, but not as important as, and you can fill in the blank about a whole bunch of things which seem to take priority over the branding of the company. So it's refreshing to see a company that right from the start has viewed branding as key. It's no surprise that this is not the founding team's first go around starting a cybersecurity company. Mind is the company, and it's in a tough segment, which is DLP. There's lots of baggage out there with prospects who have scars, they have preconceptions, misconceptions, even fear around deploying, implementing, trying to use DLP. And yet Mind is making progress as an early stage company, which is why I was really enjoyed my conversation with Jimmy Tsang, the CMO at Mind. We talked about how the DLP segment has evolved, what they learned as they positioned Mind right from the start, how and why their positioning evolved over time, and a whole lot more. I'm Andrew Monahan, and this is the Cybersecurity Go-to-Market podcast, where we tackle the question, how can cybersecurity companies grow sales faster? All right, well, Jimmy, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on. We're going to be talking today about something that's near and dear to my heart, going back many, many years, and that's DLP. If you and I were talking in 2005 about DLP, we'd be in a world of things such as agents, host approaches versus network approaches. We'd be talking about regex and how to get better regex. We'd be talking about compliance checklists. We'd be talking about the veracity of the data that we're getting, things like that. So we're not talking about that these days. What happened? What broke in DLP that forced it to evolve into where we are right now and 20 years later in 2025?
Well, you'd be surprised because we're still talking about a lot of those things even today, especially with our customers. Again, they still, have a lot of these legacy DLP products and tools. And it's hard. It's hard to really sort of replace and unwind a lot of that technology and all the policies that are related to it. But I think what broke really DLP is trust, right? Is the trust in the DLP tools and the programs that a lot of these organizations created. I think I've heard of your other podcast where you mentioned DLM, right? Data loss monitoring, and that's what basically DLP became. It's about monitoring where issues happened. You're getting a lot of alerts, but you're not doing much with it because you're not trusting the system to be smart enough to be actually efficient enough to actually take action. And I think that's the difference these days is, it's especially in this, I mentioned the era of AI. The era of AI and cloud, the attack surface or at least the exfiltration surface is much broader than it's ever been. And how do you trust your DLP program, a legacy DLP tool, to be able to stop but not inhibit productivity, stop data leaks, but not inhibit productivity in the same time. So I think that's what's breaking for DLP in general is in this era of productivity. I think everything has accelerated in terms of innovation and productivity because of AI. How do you trust that your DLP will not stop that, but also be safe enough for, secure enough to use AI and stop data leaks? So I think that's what a lot of organizations are dealing with. They're trying to battle and understand, how do I enable the organization without stopping it? So.
Yeah, I imagine the AI presents an interesting challenge. One is it's probably part of that expansion of the attack surface, exfiltration surface, right? But also, I'm wondering what it really means for the veracity of being able to trust your DLP. Have you been able to see and measure, the improvements in what you're able to do now, or is it still a little bit early to do that?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is our company would not exist without AI. So Mind itself would not exist without AI because that's really the foundation of our platform. Like we wouldn't be able to basically discover and classify the billions of files that we see in our customers' environments without AI. So really the trust there, the visibility that you get with AI these days is just incredible. And the idea is that really there's no mind without AI, but also in terms of how do you go from legacy DLP that's really based on policies, based on sort of user tagging of data, of sort of regex pattern matching to classify and automatically classify data, to something that's automated and that's trustworthy. And what we're seeing is, we're seeing like 95% reduction in false positives that we used to, but also not just false positives, but even alert noise. Because when you have static policies that just generate alerts, even though they may be interesting, they may not be very critical. They may not rise to the priority that a security team should look at. So really, the idea is our platform looks at both the sort of the context of the alert, but also the content within those files, and which is actually unique in the industry. Is being able to see what's inside the files and what's around it to actually say, hey, you should be paying attention. So our customers actually are trusting the system because it's not throwing them hundreds or thousands of alerts per day, but it's actually elevating the alerts that they should worry about. And that's really interesting that they get less alerts, but they trust the system more because they feel like those alerts are real.
It feels like, from what you're saying, then, that capability has definitely changed in the last, even a couple of years. Never mind the last 5-10 years. I would imagine one thing that changed a lot slower is the perceptions of buyers around what they think DLP is, what it's been, what it might be, how useful it is. I'm wondering, what state of mind do you see most often with the evaluators and buyers of DLP today?
Yeah, I think it's around sort of confusion, right? I think that's the state that we see. They're confused by a lot of different acronyms that's available in the industry, whether it's DSPM, DLP, DDR. There's a lot of acronyms out there that sort of try to help to solve this. So I think it is a state of confusion, and the idea is that with 20, as you said, you've sold DLP in the past, right? 20, 30 years ago. There's a lot of sort of scorched earth in that process. So I think what they're trying to understand is what's different. What's different today? How does AI change the game? And they're willing to actually to learn and educate themselves on what's possible. How do we go from compliance to actually data security that we always wanted, but they never could achieve? Basically DLP became a checkbox for a lot of people.
And I'm wondering what that means for you as someone who heads up marketing at a modern DLP company. How you think about, how do we change those minds? How do we reduce the confusion? How do we make this more simple in their minds than perhaps it is already? It must present an interesting marketing challenge.
It is. I think initially when I joined the company, it was around our innovation, right? Our technical capabilities, our features, the use of AI, how well we classify. But I think what we soon heard is, with this confusion, is really, the fear of actually, licensing a DLP or even starting a DLP program in general. So especially with a lot of smaller or mid-sized enterprises, they're almost unwilling to entertain putting together a DLP program. Hiring the people, licensing the software needed. But what we're seeing is, now they're trying to educate themselves, and obviously with the era of AI and mind, we're just seeing the use of AI and making it efficient and trustworthy. Again, when we started off, it was all about those technical capabilities and trying to educate the market. But I think what we soon realized is that most people don't trust DLP. They don't trust the segment. And that's what we're trying to build with our Mind brand and the messaging that we have going forward. So one of the first things that we did is we pivoted towards something called stress-free DLP. It's not about modern DLP. It's not about next-gen DLP. It's actually stress-free DLP. how do we actually, lower the stress for CISOs and their teams? To lower the stress from, the amount of alerts that they get, lower the stress of trying to put together a program. And that's what we're seeing a lot more with our customers. And, we have a lot of great testimonial videos about it where these CISOs, these, heads of security are building programs with like little headcounts and be able to effectively, enable data security without all the resources that were needed in the past. So stress-free DLP is, it's a little different. Obviously there's a little bit of rhyming there, which we had fun with, but it's actually, I think, resonated with folks, but a lot of people challenge us on it. How can DLP be stress-free? And that's a good thing. We're actually engaging in conversations, and they're willing to listen and see how we can help them, get a stress-free DLP program.
And was it relatively easy to come to that insight that stress-free was the thing to zero in on, or did you try a lot of different things and was a lot of testing, or what was the process?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say there's a lot of testing because you don't have a lot of time to test, and when you're a startup. But definitely we had a lot of ideas. We try a lot of different things, both in social, on digital, but also in our conversations. And we basically obviously what's important is to observe, to measure, and to just understand where the intent and the sort of the trust that CISOs need. So it definitely came over time. It wasn't our first message coming out. Our first message was a little bit more towards our technical capabilities, which is mind what matters. Like mind what matters is like, what is the sensitive data that really matters? And that speaks a little bit more towards our technical capabilities, because we could find sensitive data that regex could never find. Like regex is all about credit cards, social security numbers, basically, things, numbers that have patterns. But with AI, with our platform, we're able to find source code, credentials, financial statements, healthcare records, lab reports, so much to that. I think people were interested in that. That's a nice function, a nice feature, a nice capability. And it was amazing at the time because it's definitely part of the modern DLP paradigm. But really, I think they wanted to have trust and confidence in their DLP. And that's where stress-free DLP sort of resonated.
Do you think with hindsight that you needed to kind of start with the technical product feature kind of orientation to get to the more emotional position that you have right now? Or do you feel like, I wonder if we just be a little bit more careful, we might have got there sooner or even instead of?
Yeah, obviously you need it in parallel, because soon after, they get past the stress-free DLP part, they're like, well, how do you do it? Right. Yeah. So you may not, again, we led with it in the past. It was interesting because a lot of people were, interested in new technology. They would be interested in learning more. Right. But those that, may not be interested in new technology, they just wanted a solution. They wanted confidence. I think that appealed more to their emotions than to their sort of tech head type of mentality, right? So yeah, I mean, innovation is great. We have that, obviously, the capabilities, all of the, what backs up stress DLP on our website, in our conversations, but I think it's a really just good conversation starter, a great engagement, with CISOs and with folks that we don't know, that don't know us. So
I think that's a really good insight, Jimmy. And I'll tell you why. Is I think that, if you look at even like, so 2005, I don't know what the right number is, but I'm going to bet there was somewhere between 500 and 1,000 vendors in cybersecurity, right? You fast forward to now, there's 3,900 just vendors, not including resellers, MSSPs, consulting companies, things like that, right?
It's very noisy, right?
So it's really noisy, confusing. And if we as an industry think we're going to position ourselves and differentiate ourselves the same way as we did it 20 years ago, we're going to fail, right? We need to adapt to what's going on right now. And I think the idea that you adapt by just talking more about features or finding new ways to talk about a feature is not going to cut it. And I like the fact that that you led that charge to say, well, we need to up level. I think it's up leveling, right? You move from logical to emotional, which is what you're doing with the stress free, and then eventually you get to philosophical, which is the kind of join a movement thing that Andy Raskin and some of the big marketing narrative guys talk about, right? But that movement up is probably already separated yourselves from, I don't know, 80%, 95% of other cybersecurity companies, because you read their websites and you listen to their sales teams talk. It's all very feature orientated. I think it's a big shift that many have to make.
Yeah, I also think it's not just the emotion, but sometimes and I learned this at IBM Security is don't dwell on the fear, don't dwell on hey, insider risk, bad actors, malicious insiders, don't dwell on those type of hoodie icons, images that you see. But really dwell on the positive outcomes that can come out of your solution, or at least the implementation of your solution. So I think that's what I've learned over the years, not just at Mind, but even with IBM Security, is the relevation is that we're dealing with not just defenders, right? We're dealing with business leaders who are CISOs, and the business leaders care about the business, protecting the business, but not just about like stopping threats or being creating moats or walls. So I think that was another thing that our Mind brand was trying to build, is really a sense of sort of enlightenment, right? Even the name Mind means like really be thoughtful and be enlightened about what's happening, with your environment. And obviously, we love the word mind because it works with a lot of puns and stuff like that. It's like peace of mind is a big word or phrase that you'll see on our website and we use in our daily language. But it does resonate. Again, we're not trying to talk about the dark side of what's happening with data leaks, but really what's the possibility, what's the bright side of DLP.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a question or just a statement to think about. I wrestle with this a lot. Not a lot, but I wrestle with it. So, I mean, if you look at the research, buyers are more motivated by loss aversion as opposed to the positive gains from their decision, right? If they feel somehow they're going to be missing out on something or something would catch them out, then their propensity to buy and make a positive decision to go make a change is more enhanced than if it was just here's the better future, right? But as we know in our world, you can't walk around saying you're gonna get popped, the ball's gonna end, your brand's gonna go to zero, your stock price will go to a penny. That went out like 30 years ago, and yet you still hear some people do it. But you can't do that, right? So I don't know. It's a really tough thing when you think about it. Say, well, we can't throw out all the research and say, well, it all has to be positive. Somehow in there, we just threaded the idea that, there is a downside if we don't do this, but you can't lead with that, I guess. I don't know if you've thought, a lot about it, especially as you were saying, right? You're leading a lot with positivity around Mind right now, which I totally understand. But I don't know. I think there's two sides to the coin that I think, it's tough to really figure out at times.
Yeah, there's definitely two sides. Some industries or some segments in cybersecurity, you can't really have a conversation without the dark side, right? Like if you deal with EDR or malware protection or ransomware attacks, I mean that's real. that's happening, and that's going to bring your organization down. And what's really important there is really educating how you can stop that. All right, so with DLP, it's a little bit more nebulous, right? With DLP. Because there's obviously a number of things of like you don't want to lose your sensitive data, whether it's IP, source code, credentials. There's definitely a lot of bad things that can happen when you do lose sensitive data like that. But there's a lot of good things that can happen if you actually protect against it and enable the organization to do really cool things without putting a lot of hurdles in. And that's what DLP sort of fell down with, right? A lot of executives did not enjoy being blocked when they're trying to do their daily jobs. I don't think a lot of people would enjoy being blocked on, using ChatGPT or, their corporate AI engine if they get blocked every other prompt, right? So how do you do it effectively, efficiently, without hurdles? I think that's more interesting than, hey, we have these bad actors or these malicious insiders. Yes, that's important, but that's the other side of the coin. And I guess when you tell stories, you need to have both the hero and the villain, and you can't just do like, hey, let's talk about the hero because it's really boring, right? So you sort of have to have both, and but I think the conversation is more to that extent. But obviously, we lean towards the positive, the hero, than I would say the villain. But some segments they should focus on malware protection. I mean, it's just or ransomware attacks because that's like immediate. Brings your company down.
All right, Jimmy, let's learn a little bit more about you personally. Believe it or not, I've got 49 questions on my list here, but the good news is I'm not going to ask you 49. I've got this incredibly sophisticated and advanced random number generator here. I actually use some personal grade DLP to make sure that my daughters don't steal it and exfiltrate it outside the house. But I use that to generate three numbers between 1 and 49. You ready for me to spin the wheel?
Ready? Go for it, Andrew.
All right, let's go. All right, number 2. How did you make money as a kid?
Okay, well, yeah, actually, I needed to make money as a kid because I was addicted to arcade games. So my first summer job was with my dad, actually. My dad managed a Chinese restaurant in Long Island, New York. And in the summers, I would actually accompany him for, basically weeks on the end, and was a takeout boy. So even before actually it was legal to actually start making money, I did help the Chinese restaurant there. But yeah, that was a great experience. It allowed me to continue to support my addiction of video games. But soon after that, I received my first work permit when I was 14 and a half, did office jobs. But the most interesting one was being a canvasser for a nonprofit organization. And that really taught me respect for sales because I don't know if I can do it. But I did it for a summer, learned a lot, really, got me out of my shell to talk to people. But I respect sales a lot, and that actually led me to the journey of just sales and marketing in general.
Oh, I love that, and being in the family business, right? That can be a tough gig. You probably got underpaid by your dad, I would imagine.
As long as I had quarters to feed machines, arcade machines, I was happy. So,
what was your favorite arcade game?
Well, my favorites, I guess when I was college is Street Fighter 2. That's my most favorite. But I was a crazy Miss Pac-Man player. So I would just be on there for like an hour. So, yeah.
All right, let's spin the wheel again.
All right.
Number 29. What's an embarrassing or memorable moment in your marketing career?
Let's see. Let's avoid embarrassing. Let's go for memorable. So I was at IBM Security for a number of years, and I had a great project, at IBM Security where I was able to basically propose the creation of a video game, in cybersecurity. We actually called it Terminal. It actually took place in an airport terminal, and it's about, hackers basically bringing down an airport. And this was, it was going to be a, epic video game. It actually had video shootage where we were going to go to Austria and actually take over a terminal and take some footage there. And it was going to be great. And however, as you may think, COVID hit in 2020. So rather than get stranded in Austria, in the middle of COVID, we decided to stop that. But we actually just did it all through animation. And some learnings there is that it was IBM and a lot of obviously big companies have big budgets for marketing. Obviously in the startup now it's not so much, but we basically we're able to sort of think and be creative in what's possible, the realm of possibility, and that was amazing. But unfortunately, we were gonna unleash it in RSA 2020, and unfortunately, we canceled that. That was in like May timeframe of 2020, and we canceled that. And I think what we left with at our IBM Security booth was some lounge chairs, and said, "Hey, enjoy the space. We're not here." So,
Oh, wow.
so that was quite an experience. We spent quite a bit of money on that game, and it never quite got to the point where we wanted it to be, but definitely memorable.
What immediately strikes me, Jimmy, is IBM and video games are not a natural marriage. Was that a little bit of a challenge to get that approved or through the process at that end?
Actually, it wasn't in the sense that, the idea was it was for engagement. It was going to be used both in person as well as digital. So we were going to launch it at RSA. We were going to create, provide some screens, some gaming chairs, have people really experience what it's like to experience a hack and the stress of a hack in real time. And how do you solve all those questions, all those issues in real time, but in both in person at the event, but also online. So it was going to have like multi-channel, sort of interest and engagement, and it was just up in the realm of where our products were, in terms of threat intelligence, threat remediation, and again, it would have been great. It was great sort of half-wise because we did launch it digitally, but we couldn't bring it in person for at least a year or two.
All right, well, let's spin the wheel one last time.
Sounds good.
Number 15, what is the story behind you getting your first job in cybersecurity?
Yeah, it was serendipity. I wasn't looking into cyber specifically. I was actually interested in mobile. And the reason why is I joined a company, a B2C company called Traffic.com way back when, if you're familiar with it. It's almost like weather.com, right? But for traffic.
Okay.
It allows consumers to see traffic on their commutes and everything. But yeah, I started there as a product marketer, and we were acquired by Navtech, like one of the global mapping companies out there, and then we were acquired by Nokia, and that started my journey into mobile. And then soon, Nokia went through their layoffs. It was quite a experience. But then I joined a company called Fiberlink, and they actually had mobile device management. So Mass 360 was the product. I was the leader for product marketing there. And that started my journey in mobile because, it was great. At the time, iPhone was coming up, right? And I think it was launched in 2007. I joined, Mass 360 in 2012. And that's when the iPhone started to be used for enterprise purposes. And it's the whole BYOD phenomenon, bring your own device phenomenon was happening. But that started my journey in cyber.
And never looked back, huh?
Never look back, and obviously diversified, beyond just mobile phones. But at the time, it was just, it was just the era of mobile was amazing, and obviously now is the era of AI. So it's very cool.
Yeah, we've been talking around the idea of brand, right? You clearly at Mind have put a lot of thought into what that brand should be. If there's a third person in this call who's, either the CEO or first marketing hire at a much earlier stage company, they're just getting going. How would you encourage them to think about brand at an early stage? And maybe think about brand, but then the trade-offs, right? You can't do everything. So how do you trade off brand work with lead gen work and things like that? How would you encourage them to think about that?
Yeah. So, I think the idea of brand needs to reflect the technology, right? So, obviously, and I can only speak from my experience with Mind and a few other companies is, you don't start a brand without, a foundation. And the foundation and the brand promise is our technology, right? So, once we start, building the technology, it's been a couple of years before even I joined Mind. So they spent a couple of years building technology. And when I joined Mind, we launched a year after. So they've been building technology for years. And I helped build the brand with the brand agency. So that's another thing we could talk about. But, we built the brand on top of that foundation, the foundation of, AI, the discovery and classification that happens in an automated fashion. So all the capabilities that really power our brand, our Mind brand, was built first. And then once we, had that foundation, then we can actually start building, like, what are the elements of the brand that feed into it? The capabilities feed into that brand. And we actually started building that brand a year before we launched. So again, with the brand promise, the messaging, the website, the guidelines that we have, all the key elements, design elements. So we built it even before, a year before our launch. And what that did is allowed us to really come out of the gate running, right? We were, shot out the gate, did really well, just getting recognition because our technology and the brand worked well together, because it was not an MVP. It was a full-fledged DLP platform, and the brand reflected that, and then built trust. And that's what the power of brands is all about, is how do you build the trust with your customers and with the general public in general. And that's what was reflected in our website. So if you go to our website today, it's very similar to where we launched, even a year ago. And it's meant to convey that sense of trust and confidence in a platform that can deliver, stress-free DLP.
Let's rewind, because you said something that I don't often hear at all, which is not only was, I guess, the founders, early on thinking about brand, but they actually were willing to spend the money to bring in an outside agency to work on it with you. I would go to Lynn, Jimmy, and say that's not normal. Were you blessed with very forward-thinking founders who are like, no, this is absolutely the thing to do, or did you have to go in convince mode in your first 6 months or a year there?
No, I have to say we were blessed. So Iran Barak, he's our co-founder and CEO of Mind. This is his second startup. His first startup, Hexadite, was acquired by Microsoft in 2017. And, the second time around, he brought with him lessons from his first one. And one thing that he wanted to do early on was bring on marketing. Not just brand, but bring on marketing to make sure that brand, the go-to-market engine, their marketing tech stack, the sort of the whole demand gen engine gets running when we're ready to launch, and didn't really want to wait for validation, for maybe initial deals to start happening, but really come out of the gate, because again, they spent that time to build that product, right? I think that they felt, and we felt that it was ready to go. And so we were lucky enough to have Iran, with his experience, saying, "Hey, let's invest in marketing first of all, bringing me on board, and then bringing on a branding agency on board to finalize our brand." So that was through some sort of foresight and experience that Iran and the co-founders brought to the table.
Yeah, when I look at your site right now, this is not what I call Series A blue. I can't remember who coined the phrase, but
Blue.
I just love it. Right? You look at early. What were you? I'll just make it blue.
I see. It's like IBM Blue.
it's kind of like that, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know how true it is, but if you look at a whole bunch of Series A companies, the predominant color is just a very normal blue, maybe dark blue with white text or whatever. But yours is not, right? There's animations on there. There's different things that captures the imagination a little bit. This is very different, right? So I wonder how you measure coming out of stealth as you launched. Were there any ways you were measuring somehow brand and whether your investments were working, or was it done on the idea of, look, this is just the right thing to do. Let's just go do it.
Yeah, I think initially as a startup, it's hard to measure, right? Because it's hard to get out the gates without a huge budget, right? Yes, if we had sort of immense amounts of budget, then we can advertise, we can create awareness, we can really fire up a lead gen program based on, millions of dollars. And that's not the reality of most startups. So, really what we had to do is, launch it, but also curate it along the way and have those conversations with our customers, and really get validation in the market through conversations, through the use of our technology. But also, we started to get a lot of industry accolades that we didn't really seek initially. Like, again, being part of like the RSA top 10 finalists for their startup competition, yeah, and as well as the Black Hats top 9 sort of finalists for their startup competition. Those sort of came, and we were pleasantly surprised. But I think it's really a validation of really where our brand and marketing, as well as the conversations and the technology that we built, but definitely the conversations with our customers. It was just, I think, it's hard to measure when you're starting out because the numbers are fairly low when you think of demand gen. But I think validation needs to happen over time, and it just doesn't happen right off the bat. So I would say a year into since launch, we're in the right direction, and we're excited about our customer traction, the deals that we have, but then the industry accolades and the amount of sort of organic outreach that we received, especially in the past year.
You've been doing this in cyber for a while now, right? You're leading marketing efforts, leading marketing teams, and clearly you've been thinking a lot about what this means for Mind. I'm wondering if you've got a marketing hill you would die on. The other marketing leaders just don't believe or haven't seen yet, whatever, or disagree with you on, that you'll say, companies should do this, but it's perhaps not the popular opinion. Anything that springs to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think brand would be one, but since we chatted a lot about that, I think another one would be in-person events. So obviously coming out of COVID, there was not a lot of in-person events, so a lot of it became about organic or inbound marketing. How do you drive them through digital channels? But I think what we've seen, especially in the past year with Mind, is that in-person events are really invaluable. They allow us to, have conversations with customers in person, with live engagements. And we're seeing them, I think the attendance of these events, whether it's RSA, Black Hats, or even like regional roundtables, it's more than ever. And I think people are, especially CISOs and cyber leaders are very interested in, meeting folks in person and, building trust there rather than just, through their own research or through inbound marketing, which is fascinating. I think there were sort of ebbs and flows in that cycle. But obviously with COVID, everything became, not in person, became digital. But now I think I'm not sure I'm willing to die on that hill, but I think it's an important part of our marketing strategy is in-person events as well as inbound. But usually with inbound, it takes a while to build a demand gen engine, especially organically with even with budgets. So with that, you need to have really a portfolio approach towards marketing.
All right, Jimmy, last question for you. I'm going to spring this on you.
Sure.
We're recording this in October 2025. In 3 years' time, imagine there was a headline, I guess, on a website, not on a blog or a newspaper, that a headline about DLP that is groundbreaking, big, captures attention. What do you think that headline would be in 3 years' time about DLP?
No, I mean, that's a good question. I actually don't think it should be. There should be no headline about DLP. I mean, it should just be part of the normal overall process. I mean, with AI, with the capabilities we have today, I don't see in 3 years' time how much better it could be. I think it should be like starting today and up into those 3 years. That I think the adoption of modern DLP, DLP that actually understands context, looks at the content, looks at data at rest, data in motion, unstructured data, structured data. I think it will be, I think in the next 3 years, it's going to be well covered. And in hopefully 3 years time, it's non-news. It's like,
Right.
hey, that's how we thought it should be.
Yeah,
After
it's
20
boring.
years,
It's
it should be boring
which
news.
does the job, right?
Yeah, and what's fascinating is DLP is hot news now because of all the innovation. So I would say the headlines is happening now, and 3 years time, it should be. I hope it is boring because then I'm not sure. Obviously, we're not going to solve every problem with sensitive data leaks, but it should be hopefully a normal part of a cybersecurity program rather than the sort of a compliance program going forward.
Well, Jimmy, on that note, that's a great way to end. I really enjoyed chatting to you this morning. Thanks for joining us. And I wish you and the team, the Mind team, every success for the rest of this year and into next year as well.
Right. Thank you, Andrew.